The Arizona desert sprawled endlessly beneath a merciless sun when Elena Diaz realized she couldn't run anymore. 2 days, 2 unbearable days of driving with barely any stops, her old Chevy sputtering warnings she'd ignored until the radiator finally surrendered in a hiss of steam. "Just a little farther," she whispered to herself, her cracked lips stinging as she gathered her few possessions from the car. The reflection in her rearview mirror showed what she'd become. A shadow of the confident art teacher she once was, now with haunted eyes and a desperate plan unraveling by the minute. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The heat rose in waves from the cracked earth as Elena shouldered her backpack and began walking. Canyon Springs was somewhere ahead. A tiny town her grandmother had mentioned once, where people minded their own business and newcomers could disappear. Perfect for a woman whose life had imploded spectacularly, leaving nothing but ashes and accusations behind. When the sun began its descent, painting the sandstone cliffs in hues of amber and crimson, Elena felt the last of her strength ebbing away. The water bottle she'd been rationing was nearly empty, and the distant thunder promised a storm with no shelter in sight. Her feet, blistered inside boots never meant for desert hiking, stumbled on loose rocks as she veered toward a narrow path that seemed to cut into the canyon wall. The path led to a small clearing where a stream trickled between smooth stones, an unexpected oasis in the parched landscape. Elena fell to her knees beside it, cupping water to her mouth with trembling hands, not caring about purification tablets or desert parasites. Survival first, consequences later. The mantra that had driven her since fleeing Phoenix 3 days ago. As darkness claimed the canyon, Elena huddled against a rock face, wrapping her thin jacket around herself. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by distant coyote calls and the whispers of wind through juniper trees. Dreams of angry faces and pointed fingers followed her into consciousness as the first light of dawn crept across the canyon floor. A low, rhythmic sound pulled Elena from her uneasy sleep, the steady chopping of wood. Someone was nearby. Panic seized her as she scrambled to her feet, wincing at her body's protests. Discovery meant questions. Questions meant lies. Or worse, truths she couldn't afford to tell. Following the sound cautiously, she emerged around a bend to find a small cabin tucked against the canyon wall, almost invisible with its weathered wood siding and roof of desert-toned tiles. On a cleared patch of ground stood a man, his back to her as he split logs with methodical precision. A border collie resting nearby spotted her first, ears perking up before bounding toward her with a curious bark. "Juniper, heel!" The man's voice carried authority without raising volume. The dog stopped, looking between her master and the stranger with obvious confusion. The man turned, and Elena found herself facing piercing eyes the color of the storm clouds gathering above. He was tall, with shoulders broadened by physical labor rather than gym machines, his face weathered by sun and wind. Not handsome in any conventional sense, but striking in his raw presence. "Private property," he said simply, resting the axe against a stump. "Canyon trails back that way." He nodded in the direction she'd come from. Elena opened her mouth to apologize, to retreat, but her legs had other ideas. The world tilted sideways as dehydration and exhaustion claimed their due. The last thing she heard was the dog's concerned whine and the man's muttered curse as he moved to catch her before she hit the ground. Consciousness returned gradually, bringing with it the unfamiliar sensation of softness beneath her and the smell of something savory cooking. Elena blinked up at rough-hewn ceiling beams, momentarily disoriented. "Finally joining the living?" The man's voice came from somewhere to her right. Elena turned her head to see him stirring something on an ancient-looking stove. "Where?" Her voice cracked with dryness. "My cabin. Seemed better than leaving you to the vultures." He crossed the small space, offering a mug of water. "Drink slowly. You were pretty far gone when you decided to collapse in my yard." Elena pushed herself up to sitting, accepting the mug with shaking hands. "Thank you. I'm sorry for trespassing." He shrugged. Canyon has its own way of deciding who belongs where. His eyes studied her with undisguised assessment. "I'm Nathaniel Reed, Most call me Nate. Elena, she offered, deliberately omitting her last name. Elena will do. A faint smile crossed his face. Well, Elena will do. You've got yourself in quite a situation. Nearest town is Canyon Springs, 15 miles north. Not much of a place to break down. You knew about my car? Found it this morning when I rode out to check the fences. Radiator shot, among other problems. He returned to the stove, ladling stew into a bowl. You can stay the night. I'll drive you to town tomorrow. Relief washed through Elena, followed quickly by suspicion. Men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. That lesson had been hard learned. As if reading her thoughts, Nate placed the bowl on a small table and gestured to it. Cabin's got 2 rooms. You'll take the bedroom. I've got a cot in the storage room for times like these. Times like what? Elena asked, moving cautiously to the table. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When the canyon sends someone my way. His matter-of-fact tone suggested this wasn't entirely unusual. Eat. We'll figure the rest out after. Juniper padded over to sit beside Elena's chair, resting her chin on Elena's knee with soulful eyes. The simple canine acceptance was more comforting than Elena wanted to admit. The stew was rich with vegetables and game meat. Venison, Elena guessed, seasoned with herbs that tasted of the surrounding wilderness. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite, and then it took considerable restraint not to wolf it down. As she ate, Elena studied her reluctant host. Nate moved with the economical grace of someone completely at home in his body and surroundings. Nothing wasted, nothing for show. He was probably in his late 30s, with threads of silver beginning at his temples, and a scar that ran along his jawline before disappearing beneath his collar. You live out here alone? She asked, breaking the silence. Just me and Juniper. He nodded toward the dog, and the canyon itself. Never really alone out here. Sounds lonely. His eyes met hers, something unreadable passing through them. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. One's a state of being, the other's a state of mind. The philosophical response surprised her. This man was more than the gruff hermit he appeared to be. How long have you been running? He asked abruptly. Elena stiffened. I'm not. Save it. He cut her off without heat. I recognize the look. Question is whether you're running from something worth running from, or just running because you don't know what else to do. The perceptiveness of his observation stung. That's none of your business. Maybe not, he agreed. But my cabin, my rules. I don't harbor fugitives or anyone who might bring trouble down on this place. I'm not wanted by the law, if that's what you're asking. Not technically, at least. The authorities weren't looking for her, but plenty of others might be. Nate studied her face, apparently finding whatever confirmation he sought. Good enough for now. You can tell me your story or not. That's your choice. But while you're here, you pull your weight. I'm only staying the night, Elena reminded him. A smile ghosted across his face. We'll see what the canyon has to say about that. Later, as shadows lengthened across the canyon floor, Elena sat on the small porch, watching Nate work with a piece of wood and a carving knife. His hands, large and calloused, moved with surprising delicacy as he coaxed form from the raw material. What are you making? She asked. Don't know yet. He turned the wood, studying it. It usually tells me along the way. Elena found herself smiling for the first time in days. That's not how most people approach creative work. Most people try to force their vision instead of listening to what's already there. He glanced up at her. You sound like you know something about it. I used to teach art, she admitted, the words slipping out before she could catch them. Elementary school. Used to? Elena looked away. Things change. Nate didn't press further, returning to his carving as silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but full of unspoken questions. The storm that had threatened all day finally arrived with dramatic flourish, lightning cracking across the darkened sky as rain began hammering against the cabin roof. Juniper pressed against Elena's legs, whimpering softly at each thunderclap. She's afraid of storms, Nate explained, gathering his carving materials. Has been since she was a pup. Poor girl. Elena stroked the dog's head. It's okay to be afraid of things that are bigger than you. Nate gave her a long look. The question is what you do with that fear. They retreated inside as the downpour intensified. The cabin, which had seemed small and confining earlier, now felt like a fortress against the elements. Secure in its solidity, defiant in its isolation. Nate lit a kerosene lamp that cast warm, dancing light across the simple interior. Power goes out sometimes during storms, he explained. Solar backup only does so much. Elena found herself relaxing despite everything, watching as Nate moved around the cabin with practiced ease, securing windows and checking supplies. There was something comforting about his self-sufficiency, his obvious capability. How did you end up out here, she asked, genuinely curious. Most people don't choose to live miles from civilization. Nate was quiet for so long that Elena thought he might ignore the question. Finally, he settled into a worn armchair across from her. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan, he said, his voice matter-of-fact. Came back different. Cities had too many people. Too much noise, too many ways things could go wrong. His fingers absently traced the scar along his jaw. Found this place by accident during a hiking trip. The owner was an old Vietnam vet looking to sell. Something about it felt right. And you've been here ever since? Elena asked softly. 7 years now. He nodded. Do some guiding for tourists, some carpentry work in town when cash runs low. Mostly keep to myself. And that's enough for you? His eyes met hers. It has been. The simple statement hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to explore. Later, lying in Nate's bed, the sheets smelling of sun and desert sage, Elena stared at the ceiling, listening to the storm's fury gradually subside. For the first time since fleeing Phoenix, her mind wasn't racing with panic and contingency plans. Instead, it kept returning to the enigmatic man sleeping in the next room, and his strange, peaceful existence in this remote canyon. She had planned to disappear in Canyon Springs, to find some anonymous job and a forgettable apartment where she could hide from the wreckage of her former life. But something about this place, the rugged beauty of the canyon, the rhythm of life dictated by nature rather than human demands, stirred long-dormant feelings of possibility. It was foolish, of course. She couldn't stay here, couldn't risk bringing her troubles to this tranquil corner of the world, couldn't risk exposing her secrets to a man who seemed to see too much with those storm cloud eyes. Tomorrow, she would go to Canyon Springs as planned. She would thank Nathaniel Reed for his reluctant kindness and walk away without looking back. It was the only sensible choice. As dawn broke, Elena woke to the smell of coffee and the soft sounds of movement. She found Nate in the kitchen area, already dressed, pouring dark liquid into 2 mugs. Storm passed, he said by way of greeting, nodding toward the window where golden light streamed in. Roads should be passable by mid-morning. Thank you. Elena accepted the coffee, wrapping her hands around the warmth. For everything. Nate studied her face. You still look half dead. Sit. Breakfast first, then we'll talk about getting you to town. Juniper appeared at Elena's side, nudging her hand for attention. The dog's simple affection broke through something in Elena's carefully constructed walls. She knelt, burying her fingers in the border collie's thick fur as unexpected tears threatened. She has that effect on people, Nate observed quietly. Always knows who needs her most. Elena composed herself, standing to find Nate watching her with an expression that wasn't quite pity, something closer to recognition. Why are you helping me? She asked bluntly. You don't know me. I could be anyone. I know enough, he replied. You're someone in trouble, not someone who is trouble. There's a difference. How can you be sure? His smile was slight, but genuine. Juniper vouches for you. That's good enough for me. The simple faith, in his dog's judgment, in his own instincts, was both touching and terrifying. Elena hadn't experienced that kind of unquestioning acceptance in longer than she cared to remember. After a breakfast of eggs and homemade bread, Nate surprised her with a proposal. My Jeep needs a new transmission, he said. Been putting it off, but I've got the parts now. Could use an extra pair of hands while I work on it. He paused, eyes meeting hers. Means I can't take you to town today. Maybe tomorrow, if we get it fixed. The transparent excuse hung between them, They both knew he could easily have driven her in today and worked on his vehicle later. "Are you offering me a job?" Elena asked, eyebrow raised. "Offering you a day," Nate corrected. "To rest, to think, to decide what comes next." His expression softened slightly. Sometimes the canyon knows what people need better than they do themselves. Elena should have refused, should have insisted he take her to town immediately. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'm pretty good with tools. My father was a mechanic." Something like approval flickered in Nate's eyes. "We'll see about that." The day passed in companionable work beneath the Jeep's raised chassis, Nate's instructions clear and concise, his patience unwavering when Elena's city-softened hands fumbled with unfamiliar tools. Juniper kept watch from a shady spot nearby, occasionally bringing them sticks in hopeful invitation to play. By late afternoon, grease-stained and sore in muscles long unused, Elena felt a peculiar sense of accomplishment as the engine roared to life. Nate's rare smile of satisfaction did something unexpected to her heart rate. "You weren't lying about knowing your way around an engine," he commented, wiping his hands on a rag. "I never lie about my skills," Elena replied. "Only about everything else," her conscience added silently. As the day cooled into evening, Nate suggested a walk to stretch out the kinks from working on the Jeep. They followed a narrow trail that wound deeper into the canyon, Juniper ranging ahead and circling back as if to ensure they were keeping up. The landscape opened into a hidden valley where cottonwoods clustered around a spring-fed pool. The water, impossibly clear and reflecting the evening sky, took Elena's breath away. "Local secret," Nate said, watching her reaction with evident pleasure. "The Navajo consider it a sacred place. Water in the desert always is." Elena knelt to touch the cool surface, watching ripples spread outward. "It's beautiful. This whole canyon is. Most people never see it. They stick to the marked trails, the tourist spots." Nate sat on a boulder beside the pool. "You have to wander off the path to find the real magic." The metaphor wasn't lost on Elena. Her entire life had been a marked trail: prestigious art school, secure teaching position, engagement to a prominent gallery owner, until it had all collapsed spectacularly 3 months ago. "Sometimes the path is there for a reason," she said softly. "To keep you safe. Safe isn't the same as alive." Nate's eyes held hers. "You strike me as someone who's been playing it safe for a long time." The observation cut closer than he could know. Elena looked away, unwilling to acknowledge its accuracy. "You don't have to tell me what you're running from," Nate said after a while. "But whatever it is, it doesn't define you. Not unless you let it. You sound pretty confident for someone who doesn't know me at all." "I know what I see." His voice was matter-of-fact. "Someone strong enough to survive whatever happened. Smart enough to know when to ask for help, and brave enough to start over." The simple assessment, so at odds with how Elena had been viewing herself these past months, unlocked something inside her. Words began spilling out, hesitantly at first, then in a torrent she couldn't stop. She told him about Marcus Whitaker, the charismatic gallery owner who had swept her off her feet with promises of supporting her art while she taught. About discovering, too late, that he had been using her teaching position to identify talented children whose work he could acquire cheaply, falsifying their ages to sell his prodigies at inflated prices. About her confrontation with him, his threats, the scandal that had cost her job and reputation when she tried to expose him. "He made sure everyone believed I was part of it," Elena said bitterly. "That I helped identify the children, coached them to create marketable work. By the time I realized what was happening, he had emails and documents with my forged signature. The perfect paper trail." Nate listened without interruption, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "The investigation is ongoing," she concluded, "but his family has connections. And after the media painted me as either a willing accomplice or a vindictive ex-fiancé, who would believe me?" She swallowed hard. "So I ran, left everything behind." Silence settled between them, broken only by the gentle sounds of water and wind. "You didn't run," Nate said finally. "You retreated to regroup. There's a difference." Elena gave a hollow laugh. "Is there? A coward doesn't stand up to someone like that in the first place," he pointed out. "You tried to do the right thing. It went wrong. That doesn't make you wrong." The simple validation, from a stranger who had no reason to take her side, cracked Elena's carefully maintained composure. Tears came then, Not the panicked ones of recent months, but a deep, cleansing release of grief and rage and helplessness. Through it all, Nate remained beside her, a solid, undemanding presence. When her tears finally subsided, he offered a clean bandana from his pocket without comment. "Thank you," she said, embarrassed by the breakdown. "No need." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Sun's going down. We should head back." As they walked, Juniper pressed close to Elena's side, occasionally looking up as if checking on her well-being. The dog's silent support was as comforting as Nate's lack of judgment. Back at the cabin, Nate built a small fire in the outdoor pit while Elena prepared a simple meal from his supplies. They ate beneath stars that seemed close enough to touch, the night air crisp with the scent of juniper and pine. "What will you do in Canyon Springs?" Nate asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Elena sighed. "Find work. Waitressing, probably. Stay low until I figure out what comes next. And then? I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back to teaching, not with my reputation. My art." She trailed off, thinking of the sketches and paintings she'd left behind in her hasty departure. "I haven't drawn a single line since it all happened." Nate prodded the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Seems like you're giving him an awful lot of power over your life. It's not that simple. Never said it was simple. Just said it was a choice." He looked up, meeting her eyes across the flames. "You can let what happened define you, or you can define what happens next." The words resonated in places Elena had thought long numb. She studied this strange, solitary man who spoke with such unexpected wisdom. "Is that what you did?" she asked. "After Afghanistan?" A shadow crossed his face. "Eventually. Took longer than it should have." "What changed?" "Found this place." He gestured to the canyon surrounding them. "Realized I could keep fighting old battles, or I could build something new." His smile was faint but genuine. Juniper helped. Hard to stay lost in your head when you've got a dog demanding your attention. As if recognizing her cue, Juniper moved to lay her head on Elena's knee, soulful eyes gazing up with uncomplicated affection. "She really does know who needs her, doesn't she?" Elena murmured, stroking the dog's silky ears. "Better than most humans know themselves," Nate agreed. "She chose you the minute you showed up. That means something." Later, as Elena prepared for bed in the cabin's small bedroom, she found herself lingering at the window, gazing out at the star-scattered sky. The thought of leaving tomorrow filled her with an unexpected reluctance. This remote place with its stark beauty, the steadfast dog, the enigmatic man, all of it had penetrated her defensive shell in ways she hadn't thought possible. "It's just one day," she told herself firmly. "Don't make it more than it is." But as she drifted toward sleep, Elena couldn't help wondering if Nate was right, if the canyon itself had somehow brought her here for reasons beyond her understanding. Morning dawned clear and brilliant, the desert landscape transformed by the previous day's rain. Wildflowers had erupted overnight in vibrant patches across the canyon floor, their brief, spectacular lives a reminder of nature's resilience. Elena found Nate outside, splitting wood with methodical precision, Juniper watching attentively from nearby. "Morning," he greeted her, pausing mid-swing. "Sleep all right?" "Better than I have in months," she admitted. "Something about this place." He nodded in understanding. "Canyon has its own medicine." They shared a quiet breakfast, the inevitability of her departure hanging unspoken between them. Elena found herself noticing details she'd missed before. The way sunlight caught in Nate's dark hair, the graceful economy of his movements, the small carvings that decorated the cabin's interior. "Did you make all of these?" she asked, examining a delicate hummingbird perched on a shelf. "Over the years." He shrugged, but she caught the hint of pride in his voice. "Helps pass the winter evenings." "They're beautiful," she said honestly. "You have a real gift." "Just patience," he countered, but his eyes warmed at the compliment. When they finished eating, Nate cleared his throat. "I should get you to town. You've got plans to make. Elena nodded, ignoring the hollow feeling in her chest. Thank you. For everything. He stood, reaching for his keys, when Juniper suddenly barked, a sharp, alert sound that had both humans turning toward her. The border collie was at the window, hackles raised. Someone's coming, Nate said, his entire demeanor shifting to wary alertness. He moved to a drawer, removing a pair of binoculars before stepping onto the porch. Elena followed, heart racing. Had Marcus found her somehow? Had she led trouble directly to this peaceful refuge? Nate scanned the approach to the cabin, his expression grim. Black, SUV, city plates. He lowered the binoculars, turning to Elena. Expecting company? No, she whispered, fear clenching her stomach. No one knows I'm here. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Nate studied her face, apparently satisfied with what he saw there. Stay inside with Juniper. I'll handle this. Nate, Trust me, he said simply, and despite everything, Elena found that she did. She retreated inside with Juniper, watching through the window as the SUV pulled to a stop and two men emerged, one in an expensive suit that looked absurdly out of place in the canyon setting, the other, larger, with the unmistakable bearing of private security. Nate stood waiting, arms crossed, as the visitors approached. I'm looking for Elena Diaz, the suited man called, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. I have reason to believe she might be in this area. Elena felt her blood run cold. It was James Whitaker, Marcus's brother and attorney, the man who had orchestrated the smear campaign against her. Don't know anyone by that name, Nate replied, his posture relaxed but watchful. James smiled thinly. Her car was found abandoned on the road leading here. Distinctive blue Chevy Arizona plates. Lot of cars pass through. Nate shrugged. Most of them don't stop. The security man took a step forward, but James held up a hand to stop him. Ms. Diaz is a former employee of my brother's gallery. There have been some unfortunate misunderstandings. We simply want to speak with her. Clear things up. Like I said, Nate repeated. Don't know her. James reached into his jacket, producing a business card. If you do happen to see her, please give her this. Tell her Marcus is willing to drop everything, the allegations, the lawsuits, if she'll simply sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear quietly. Elena felt a surge of anger replace her fear. A non-disclosure agreement. Of course. Marcus was feeling the heat of the investigation and looking for a way to silence her permanently. Outside, Nate took the card without comment. James looked past him to the cabin. Nice little setup you have here. Very isolated. Would be a shame if there were questions about your property boundaries. I understand these land rights can get complicated. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air. Beside Elena, Juniper growled low in her throat. Boundaries are pretty clear from where I stand, Nate said, his voice deceptively casual. You're on private property. I've asked you to leave. What happens next is entirely up to you. Something in his tone, or perhaps in his stance, made James reconsider whatever he'd been about to say. He nodded curtly. We'll be in Canyon Springs for the next 2 days. The offer stands until then. As the SUV pulled away, Elena sank onto a chair, legs suddenly weak. Juniper pressed against her, offering silent comfort. Nate entered a moment later, his expression unreadable as he placed the business card on the table. I'm so sorry, Elena began. I never meant to bring trouble here. Not your trouble, Nate corrected her. His. He nodded toward the card. Question is, what do you want to do about it? Elena stared at the embossed lettering, a wave of hopelessness threatening to engulf her. What can I do? It's his word against mine, and he's made sure no one will believe me. Maybe, Nate said slowly, or maybe he's running scared. Men like that don't offer deals unless they're worried. The observation gave Elena pause. Was it possible? Had the investigation found something to corroborate her story? Either way, Nate continued, you've got a choice to make. Sign his paper and disappear, or stand your ground and fight. Fight how? Elena asked bitterly. I have no money, no lawyer, no evidence they haven't already twisted or destroyed. Nate was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Juniper's head. I know some people in town. Good people. Sheriff owes me a favor from when I found his kid lost in the backcountry last winter. Editor of the local paper used to be an investigative journalist in Chicago before she burned out and moved here. Why would they help me? Elena asked. I'm nobody to them. Because that's what community means, Nate said simply. Looking out for each other, especially against outsiders who think money buys them the right to run roughshod over people. The offer of support, unexpected and undeserved, brought fresh tears to Elena's eyes. I can't ask you to do that. I've already put you at risk just by being here. You didn't ask. I'm offering. He met her gaze steadily. Your choice, Elena. Run again, or stand with people who'll stand with you. The decision crystallized with surprising clarity. Elena was tired of running, tired of letting Marcus Whitaker steal not just her past but her future as well. I want to stay, she said, the words carrying more weight than their simple meaning. I want to fight. Something like approval flickered in Nate's eyes. Then we'd better get to work. The days unfolded in a new rhythm at Nate's canyon home. Elena moved into the small guest cabin that sat a stone's throw from the main house. For visiting friends, Nate had explained, though she suspected such visitors were rare. The space was simple but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a small desk beneath a window facing east, and shelves lined with well-worn books on everything from desert ecology to classical philosophy. Temporary, she told herself each morning as she watched the sunrise paint the canyon walls in shades of amber and rose, just until this is resolved. Yet with each passing day the mantra felt less like a reminder and more like a lie she was telling herself. In town, wheels were turning slowly but steadily. Sheriff Holbrook, a taciturn man with shrewd eyes and a legendary memory, had made calls to colleagues in Phoenix. Maggie Chen, the former Chicago journalist who now ran Canyon Springs' weekly paper, was digging into Marcus Whitaker's business practices with quiet determination. She's good, Nate told Elena, as they shared coffee on his porch one morning, a week after her decision to stay. When Maggie gets that look in her eye, someone's about to have a very bad day. Elena managed to smile, though anxiety still churned beneath her outward calm. I hope you're right. James said they'd only be in town for 2 days, but I saw their SUV parked outside the diner yesterday. They're waiting you out, Nate said matter-of-factly, thinking you'll get scared. Change your mind. Maybe I should, Elena admitted, voicing the doubt that had kept her awake most of the night. This isn't just my fight anymore. I've dragged you and people who don't even know me into it. Nate's gaze was steady. Nobody in Canyon Springs does anything they don't want to do. That's why most of us live here. He set his mug down, leaning forward slightly. Besides, from what Maggie's found so far, you weren't his first victim. Just the first to fight back. The information shouldn't have surprised Elena, but it sent a chill through her nonetheless. Others? 3 that she's confirmed. Assistant teachers, gallery interns. All young women who suddenly left their positions under clouds of suspicion or incompetence. His expression darkened. Pattern's pretty clear once you start looking. Elena closed her eyes briefly, imagining those other women, driven away, silenced, their careers and reputations in tatters. Just like Marcus had intended for her. How does he keep getting away with it? Money, Nate said bluntly. Connections. People willing to look the other way. He studied her face. You still afraid? Yes, she admitted. But not of him. Not anymore. Something like approval flickered in Nate's eyes. Good. Fear is only useful when it keeps you sharp, not when it keeps you running. The conversation was interrupted by Juniper's alert bark as a dusty pickup truck appeared on the winding road to the cabin. Elena tensed automatically, but Nate remained relaxed. That's just Roy, he explained. Brings supplies out from town once a month. He glanced at her. Also happens to be the best tracker in 3 counties, and knows these canyons better than anyone alive. The elderly man who emerged from the truck belied Nate's description. Small and wiry, with skin tanned to leather by decades in the sun, Roy Holland looked more like a gentle grandfather than a rugged outdoorsman. But his eyes, sharp and assessing beneath bushy white brows, missed nothing as Nate made introductions. "Heard you stirred up some trouble with them city folks at the hotel," Roy said without preamble, accepting the coffee Elena offered. "Not intentionally," she replied. Roy chuckled. "Best kind of trouble usually ain't." He turned to Nate. "Maggie sent these out with me. Said you'd want to see them right away." He handed over a thick manila envelope that Nate opened immediately, spreading several papers across the porch table. Elena recognized financial documents, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be copies of emails. "Well, I'll be damned," Nate murmured, scanning the contents. Maggie came through. "What is it?" Elena asked, moving closer. "Bank records," Nate explained, pointing to a series of transactions. "Shows money moving from Whitaker Gallery accounts to offshore holding companies, then back to personal accounts under different names. Classic money laundering pattern." "But how did she get these?" Elena asked, astonished. Roy snorted. "Maggie's got friends in low places and high ones. 20 years covering Chicago corruption teaches you a thing or two about following money." Elena stared at the documents, hope and trepidation warring within her. "Is this enough? To clear my name?" "Maybe," Nate said cautiously. "But there's something else." He slid another paper toward her, a printout of an email from Marcus to James Whitaker, dated just after Elena had first confronted Marcus about her suspicions. The message was brief but damning. "ED becoming a problem. Set up the usual solution. Make sure documentation shows her involvement from the beginning. Use the Peterson format. Worked before." Elena felt her hands trembling as she read the words, proof of exactly what she'd claimed all along. "He wrote it down," she whispered. "He actually wrote it down." "Arrogance," Roy commented. "Men like that never think they'll get caught." "This is," Elena struggled to find words. "This changes everything." "Maybe," Nate cautioned again. "Depends what we do with it." "Take it to the police," Elena said immediately. Roy and Nate exchanged glances. "Could do that," Roy said slowly. "But worth considering that Whitaker's got friends in the Phoenix PD. How you think they knew where to find your car so quick?" The implication sent a chill through Elena. "Then what? We can't just sit on this." "We don't," Nate assured her. "But we need to be smart. Hand it over to the right people, the right way." He gathered the documents, returning them to the envelope. "Maggie's got a contact at the State Attorney General's office. Someone she trusts." "And in the meantime?" Elena asked. "In the meantime," Nate said, his expression grim, "we make sure Whitaker and his brother don't get any bright ideas about making you disappear before these documents do the same to them." After Roy departed with the promise to deliver the envelope to Maggie personally, Elena found herself pacing the small confines of her cabin, mind racing with possibilities and fears. The evidence was real, tangible proof that could exonerate her. But the danger had also suddenly become more concrete. If Marcus discovered what they had, what would he do? How far would he go to protect himself? A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She opened the door to find Nate standing there, a canvas bag in one hand and Juniper at his heels. "Get your hiking boots," he said without preamble. "I want to show you something." Elena hesitated. "Is this really the time for sightseeing?" "Best time there is," he countered. "Roy's delivering those documents. Maggie's making her calls. Nothing more we can do today except wait, and waiting makes people crazy." He nodded toward her boots by the door. "So we walk." There was wisdom in his practicality. Elena grabbed her boots and a light jacket, following Nate and Juniper onto a narrow trail that wound deeper into the canyon than she'd ventured before. They hiked in companionable silence, the only sounds their footsteps on the rocky path and Juniper's occasional excited forays into the underbrush. The physical exertion gradually cleared Elena's mind, replacing anxiety with the simple focus on breath and movement. After nearly an hour, the trail opened onto a spectacular vista, a natural amphitheater of red rock, where ancient petroglyphs decorated a smooth cliff face. A small spring bubbled from the rock base, creating a pool surrounded by lush vegetation that seemed miraculous in the desert setting. Local people call this the speaking place, Nate explained, setting down his pack. Supposedly the canyon spirits are closest to our world here. Elena approached the petroglyphs reverently, tracing their outlines with her eyes. Spirals, animal figures, handprints pressed against stones centuries ago. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Thought you might appreciate it." Being an artist and all. Nate's voice was casual, but when Elena turned to look at him, his expression held something deeper. Understanding, perhaps. "I haven't felt like an artist in a long time," she admitted. "Doesn't work that way," he replied, unpacking a small lunch from his bag. "You don't stop being what you are just because circumstances change." The simple truth of his words resonated uncomfortably. Had she allowed Marcus to take that from her too? Her identity as an artist had been so intertwined with her teaching, her connection to the gallery world, that when those were ripped away, she'd let the art go with them. Nate handed her a sandwich and settled beside her on a sun-warmed rock. "After my third tour," he said quietly, "I couldn't sleep in a bed. Spent 6 months on the floor of my apartment, jumping at every car backfire, flinching when strangers got too close." His gaze was distant, seeing something beyond the canyon walls. "Thought I'd left myself over there, the person I used to be." Elena listened, sensing the rarity of this confidence. Took a long time to realize that person was still there. Changed, sure, scarred up, but not gone. He looked at her directly then. "You're still an artist, Elena, whether you're making art right now or not." Tears pricked at her eyes. Unexpected and unwelcome. "I'm not sure I remember how." Nate reached into his pack again, pulling out a small leather-bound sketchbook and a tin of pencils. "Only one way to find out." Elena stared at the offering, a knot forming in her throat. "I can't." "Can," he corrected gently. "Maybe not what you used to do or how you used to do it, but something." With trembling fingers, Elena accepted the sketchbook, running her hand over its smooth cover. When was the last time she'd drawn anything? Before the confrontation with Marcus, certainly. Before the accusations and counter-accusations, the lawyers and reporters, the whispers that followed her through the school hallways. "I don't know where to start," she confessed. Nate gestured to the canyon surrounding them. "Start where you are." It was that simple, and that terrifying. Elena opened the sketchbook, selected a pencil, and hesitantly began to draw, not the majestic landscape or ancient petroglyphs, but Juniper, who had settled at her feet with canine contentment. The first lines were awkward, tentative, but gradually, as muscle memory awakened, her hand grew more confident. The familiar flow state that had once been her refuge began to return, that sense of time suspended, as observation and creation merged into a single, absorbing act. She was barely aware of Nate moving away to explore the area, giving her the privacy of concentration. The shadows had lengthened considerably by the time she looked up. Suddenly conscious of how much time had passed, Nate sat a short distance away, whittling a piece of wood with the same quiet focus she'd given her drawing. Sensing her attention, he glanced up. "Welcome back," he said simply. Elena looked down at her sketchbook, page after page, filled with studies of Juniper, the spring, details of petroglyphs, and finally, a rough but recognizable portrait of Nate himself captured in a moment of contemplation. "I didn't realize," she began, then stopped, unsure how to express what the experience had meant. "Art does that," Nate observed. "Takes you out of time for a while." He stood, brushing dust from his jeans. "How do you feel?" Elena considered the question seriously. "Like I found something I thought was lost." His smile was brief but genuine. "Good. We should head back before we lose the light." As they gathered their things, Elena impulsively tore out the sketch of Nate and offered it to him. "Thank you for this. For everything." He accepted it with surprising reverence, studying the drawing before carefully tucking it into his shirt pocket. "Talent like yours shouldn't stay buried," he said quietly. "Whatever happens with Whitaker, remember that." The hike back was easier somehow, though uphill in sections. Elena felt lighter, as if she'd shed some invisible burden among the ancient stones of the speaking place. She found herself noticing details she'd missed on the outward journey, the complex patterning of lichen on rocks, The way certain cacti caught the late afternoon light, the darting movements of small lizards disturbed by their passing. "You see differently now," Nate observed, catching her pause to study a particularly striking rock formation. "I think I'm remembering how to see," she corrected. "I forgot for a while." They crested the final rise, to find Roy's truck parked outside Nate's cabin again, the man himself sitting on the porch steps with Nate's satellite phone beside him. His expression as they approached sent Elena's momentary peace crashing down. "What happened?" Nate asked, immediately alert. "Maggie called," Roy said grimly. "Whitaker's people tried to access her office last night. Broke in through the back. She caught them copying files from her computer." Elena felt her stomach drop. "The documents?" "Safe," Roy assured her. "Maggie's too smart to keep everything in one place. But they know she's investigating, and they know she's found something." "Did she call the police?" Nate asked. "Sheriff's involved, but there's only so much he can do. Break-in, trespassing, misdemeanors at most." Roy's weathered face creased with concern. "But that's not the worst of it. Seems they've been asking questions around town. Offering money for information about where you might be staying." Elena felt a cold dread settling in her chest. "Did anyone tell them?" "Folks here are loyal to their own," Roy said. "And Nate's one of our own. But money talks, and there's always someone willing to listen." He glanced at Nate. "Maggie thinks you should bring Elena into town. Safety in numbers. Public places. Harder for them to try anything." Nate was already shaking his head. "Town's the first place they'll look. Out here, we can see them coming. And be completely isolated if they do," Roy pointed out. "I've got supplies, weapons if needed," Nate countered. "And you know as well as I do that no one finds anything in these canyons they don't want found." The two men stared at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Roy sighed. "Your call. But at least take this." He handed Nate a small satellite phone. "Maggie's contact at the AG's office wants to talk to Elena directly. Says they're building a case but need her statement." Hope flared within Elena, tempered immediately by caution. "How do we know we can trust this person?" "We don't," Nate said bluntly. "But Maggie does, and that counts for something." Roy stood, joints creaking audibly. "I should get back. Promised the wife I'd be home for dinner." He fixed Nate with a stern look. "You call if anything happens. Anything at all. I can have a dozen men out here within the hour." After Roy departed, Elena and Nate sat in silence on the porch, watching darkness claim the canyon. Juniper lay between them, head resting on Elena's foot as if offering reassurance. "I've put you in danger," Elena said finally. "You should have let me go to Canyon Springs that first day." Nate's laugh held no humor. "You think I haven't been in danger before?" He shook his head. "Danger's just a circumstance, Elena. How we face it. That's the choice that matters." "Still," she insisted, "this isn't your fight." "Became my fight when they threatened to take my land," Nate reminded her. "Became my fight when they broke into Maggie's office." His voice softened slightly. "Became my fight when a woman with courage and integrity walked into my canyon and reminded me what it means to stand for something." The words hung between them, laden with implications neither was quite ready to address. Elena looked away first, her gaze drawn to the emerging stars overhead. "What do we do now?" she asked finally. "We call the AG's contact in the morning," Nate decided. "Hear what they have to say. And tonight—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Tonight we remember that even in the middle of a fight, life goes on." He stood, disappearing briefly into the cabin before returning with 2 glasses and a bottle of amber liquid. 15-year-old bourbon, he explained, pouring a finger into each glass. "Been saving it for a special occasion." "Is this a special occasion?" Elena asked. accepting the offered drink. Nate's eyes met hers, unexpectedly intense in the gathering darkness. "Finding your way back to your art seems special enough to me." They touched glasses in a silent toast. The bourbon burned pleasantly down Elena's throat, warming her from within as the night air cooled around them. Later, as they shared a simple dinner at Nate's small table, Elena found herself studying his face in the lamplight, the strong planes and angles softened by the golden glow, the perpetual vigilance in his eyes occasionally yielding to something warmer when their gazes met. "You never talk about before," she observed. "Before Afghanistan, I mean." Nate's expression closed slightly. "Not much to tell." "I doubt that," Elena countered gently. "No one becomes who you are without a story." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if retrieving memories long stored away. "Grew up in northern Michigan. Small town, logging country. Father worked the mills until they closed, then drank himself into an early grave." His fingers traced an invisible pattern on the wooden tabletop. "Mother raised 4 of us on a teacher's salary and pure stubbornness." "Is she still there?" Elena asked. A shadow crossed Nate's face. "Cancer took her while I was overseas, second to her. Couldn't get home in time." "I'm sorry," Elena said softly, understanding now the weight he carried. "She'd have liked you." Nate continued unexpectedly. "Strong women always recognized each other. That's what she used to say." The simple compliment touched Elena deeply. "And your siblings?" "Scattered. Brother in Seattle, sisters in Chicago, and someplace in Florida." He shrugged. "Christmas cards, occasional calls. They have their lives, I have mine." "Don't you get lonely out here?" The question slipped out before Elena could reconsider its presumption. Nate's smile was faint, but genuine. "Used to think being alone was the same as being safe. Took me a while to realize it's not safety if there's nothing worth protecting." His eyes met hers across the table. "I've been less lonely this past week than in the 7 years before it." The confession hung in the air between them, shifting something fundamental in their relationship. Elena felt her heartbeat quicken, aware they were approaching a threshold neither had acknowledged until now. Before she could respond, Juniper suddenly raised her head, ears pricked toward the door. A low growl rumbled in her chest. Nate was instantly alert, rising silently and moving to extinguish the lamp. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by faint moonlight filtering through the windows. "What is it?" Elena whispered. "Don't know yet," Nate murmured, reaching for the rifle mounted above the door. "Stay inside. Keep away from the windows." "Heart pounding." Elena watched as he slipped outside with Juniper, disappearing into the shadows beyond the porch. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft chorus of night insects and the distant call of a hunting owl. Minutes stretched interminably. Elena moved to the window despite Nate's warning, peering into the darkness for any sign of movement. Had someone followed Roy from town? Were Whitaker's men closing in even now? When a hand touched her shoulder, Elena nearly screamed before recognizing Nate's familiar outline. "False alarm," he said quietly. "Just a mountain lion passing through." Juniper caught the scent. Relief flooded through Elena, followed immediately by embarrassment at her fear. "I know what you thought," Nate interrupted gently. "And you were right to be cautious. But not tonight." He rested his rifle back in its place. "Tonight, we're still safe." The word "still" hung between them, acknowledging the temporary nature of their security. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The call to the Attorney General's contact, decisions about how to proceed, the looming confrontation with Marcus and his allies. But tonight, in this isolated canyon beneath a canopy of stars, they had found a momentary respite, a space outside the conflict, where Elena could reconnect with her art, where Nate could share pieces of his past, where possibility hovered in the charged silence between them. As Elena prepared to return to her cabin for the night, she paused at Nate's door. "Thank you," she said simply, "for the drawing supplies, for sharing your story, for making me feel safe when everything is falling apart." Nate studied her face in the moonlight, his expression softening in a way she'd rarely seen. "You're doing the hard part yourself," he said quietly, "standing your ground, fighting back. I'm just lucky enough to be standing with you." The words, simple but profound, followed Elena back to her cabin, where she fell asleep with her sketchbook beside her and pencil smudges still darkening her fingertips. Small, tangible reminders that regardless of what tomorrow might bring, she had already begun to reclaim pieces of herself that Marcus Whitaker had never truly owned. Dawn broke over the canyon with bands of crimson and gold stretching across the eastern sky. Elena sat on the steps of her cabin, watching the light transform the landscape minute by minute. In her hands, the sketchbook Nate had given her was open to a fresh page, her pencil capturing the subtle gradations of color and shadow as darkness retreated. Drawing at sunrise had become her ritual over the past 3 days, a way of grounding herself amidst the uncertainty that hung over everything else. The morning quiet allowed her thoughts to settle, her hand moving almost independently across the paper, recreating the world as she saw it rather than as she remembered it. "You're up early." Nate's voice came from behind her, followed by the familiar patting of Juniper's paws on the packed earth. Elena closed her sketchbook, turning to face him. "Couldn't sleep. The call with the Attorney General's office is today." Nate nodded, settling beside her on the steps. "Nervous?" "Terrified," she admitted. "What if they don't believe me? What if Marcus has gotten to them somehow?" "Then we find another way," Nate said simply, as if it were that straightforward. Perhaps for him it was. She'd noticed that about him, his ability to reduce complex problems to their essential components, to see pathways where others saw only obstacles. Juniper nudged Elena's hand with her nose, demanding attention. Elena obliged, scratching behind the dog's ears while she considered Nate's words. Another way. There was always another way if you were willing to look for it, to fight for it. "The call's at 10, she said. "What do we do until then?" Something shifted in Nate's expression, a subtle lightening that transformed his features. "We live," he said, rising to his feet and extending his hand. "Come on, I want to show you something." Curious, despite her anxiety, Elena accepted his hand and followed him toward the main cabin, Juniper trotting happily alongside them. Inside, Nate retrieved a topographic map from a drawer and spread it across the table. "Here's where we are," he said, pointing to a location deep within a maze of canyons. "And here's where we're going." His finger traced a route northward, ending at what appeared to be a secluded valley. "What's there?" Elena asked. "Something you should see." Nate's mysterious smile intrigued her. "Something that helped me when I was deciding whether to stay in this canyon or keep running." The implications of his words weren't lost on Elena. Whatever today's call revealed, whatever happened with Marcus and his threats, she would soon face the same decision, stay or run. The parallel wasn't coincidental. "How far?" she asked, already mentally calculating what she would need. 3 hours round trip, Nate replied. "Plenty of time to be back for your call." They set out as the sun cleared the canyon rim, following a trail so faint that Elena would have missed it entirely without Nate's guidance. Juniper ranged ahead, occasionally disappearing into the underbrush before reappearing with an expectant look, as if urging them to keep pace. The hike was challenging but exhilarating. Elena felt her body responding to the demands of the terrain, muscles warming, breath deepening as they climbed steadily upward. The physical exertion cleared her mind, forcing her attention to the immediate demands of navigation rather than the looming uncertainty of the day's call. "How did you find this place?" she asked during a brief rest, accepting the water bottle Nate offered. "Accident," he admitted. "Got turned around in a dust storm my first year here. Ended up taking shelter in a cave overnight. When I woke up," he gestured ahead, "found that instead." They continued upward, the trail narrowing as it wound between towering rock formations. Elena had to use her hands in places, scrambling over boulder fields and along narrow ledges. Nate moved with the easy confidence of someone who had traveled this path many times, occasionally reaching back to offer assistance at particularly tricky sections. Finally, they crested a ridge, and Elena stopped abruptly, breath catching at the vista before her. A hidden valley opened below them, its floor carpeted in wildflowers that created a mosaic of colors: blue, yellow, purple, and white, stretching toward a crystal-clear lake nestled against the far cliff face. "It's incredible," she whispered, afraid speaking too loudly might somehow dispel the vision. "Desert blooms," Nate explained. "Happens for maybe 2 weeks each spring if we get the right rainfall. Most years, it's just scrub and cactus." Elena descended into the valley, as if in a trance, barely aware of Nate following behind. The flowers reached nearly to her knees in places, their fragrance perfuming the air. Juniper bounded through the meadow, sending butterflies and bees spiraling upward in her wake. Near the lake's edge, Elena finally stopped, turning in a slow circle to take in the entirety of the hidden paradise. How is this possible? In the middle of the desert? "Underground spring," Nate explained, gesturing toward the cliff face, "creates its own microclimate. The rest is just nature doing what nature does when given half a chance, creating beauty from adversity." The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it resonated deeply with Elena. Here, in this harshest of environments, life had found not just a foothold, but a way to flourish spectacularly, if briefly. "This is what helped you decide to stay?" she asked. Nate nodded, his eyes scanning the vibrant landscape. "Found this place at my lowest point. Was planning to sell the property, head somewhere else. Alaska maybe, or Montana. Someplace even more isolated." His voice took on a distant quality. "Spent the day here. Realized I'd been looking at everything wrong." "How so?" "Was focused on what the war had taken from me," he said quietly. "Not what might still be possible if I stopped running long enough to look around." He met her gaze directly. "Came back to the cabin, unpacked my boxes, and started building instead of just surviving." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, understanding exactly what he meant. Since the scandal had erupted, she'd defined herself by what she'd lost: her career, her reputation, her confidence as an artist. She'd been so focused on escaping the damage that she hadn't considered what might still be possible, what she might build from the ruins. Impulsively, she reached for her sketchbook, needing to capture not just the visual splendor before her, but the feeling it evoked, this unexpected oasis of possibility in the midst of desolation. Nate settled nearby without comment, seeming to understand her need to process the experience through art. Time slipped away as Elena drew, her pencil moving rapidly across the page, trying to capture the interplay of light and color, the contrast between delicate blooms and rugged cliffs. When she finally looked up, she was surprised to find Nate watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, something between admiration and a deeper emotion she wasn't ready to name. "We should head back," he said, glancing at the sun's position. "Your call." The return journey passed in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the cabins, however, Elena's anxiety returned full force. In less than an hour, she would speak directly with someone who might have the power to clear her name, or confirm that she would forever live under the shadow of Marcus's accusations. "What if this changes nothing?" she asked suddenly, stopping on the trail. "What if, even with the evidence, they still don't believe me?" Nate turned to face her, his expression serious. "Then we know where we stand. And we decide what comes next." "We?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. "Unless you'd rather face it alone," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. Elena shook her head, suddenly certain of at least this one thing. "No, I wouldn't." Something shifted in Nate's eyes, a softening, a certainty. He nodded once, then continued toward the cabin without further comment. But something had been acknowledged between them, a commitment made without elaborate declarations. The satellite phone call to the Attorney General's office was scheduled precisely at 10. Elena sat at Nate's kitchen table, hands clasped tightly to control their trembling, as he dialed the number Maggie had provided. "Ms. Diaz?" A woman's crisp voice came through the speaker. "This is Assistant Attorney General Vanessa Martinez. I understand you have information regarding Marcus Whitaker and potentially fraudulent art sales." "Yes," Elena confirmed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was a teacher at Sycamore Elementary when I discovered what was happening." For the next 40 minutes, Elena detailed everything: how she had first grown suspicious when Marcus showed unusual interest in certain students' artwork, how she had discovered altered dates and signatures, how her confrontation with Marcus had led to his systematic campaign to discredit her. Martinez listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification on specific points. When Elena finally finished, there was a long pause. "Ms. Diaz, I want to be clear about something," Martinez said eventually. "The documents provided by Ms. Chen are compelling but not conclusive. We need more." Elena's heart sank. What more could there possibly be? "The email between the Whitaker brothers is damaging," Martinez acknowledged, "but their attorneys will claim it was taken out of context. We need direct evidence linking Marcus to the falsified artwork. The actual pieces, documentation of the original artists, proof of the fraud itself." "I don't have access to any of that," Elena said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Everything was at the gallery or the school, and I can't exactly walk in and ask for it." "Actually," Martinez said carefully, "that might be exactly what we need you to do." Elena exchanged a confused glance with Nate. "I don't understand." "We believe several of the fraudulent pieces are currently being prepared for an exhibition opening this weekend at the Whitaker Gallery," Martinez explained. "An exhibition called Emerging Visionaries featuring supposedly teenage artists." "The same pattern," Elena murmured, understanding dawning. "He's doing it again." "Precisely. If we could obtain proof that these are actually works by younger children, with documentation of their original creation dates." Martinez let the implication hang. "You want me to go back to Phoenix," Elena said flatly, "to the gallery." "With proper preparation and support," Martinez clarified. "This would be a coordinated operation with our office. You wouldn't be alone." Elena felt panic rising within her. "Marcus would recognize me instantly. And after his brother tracked me here, he must know I'm gathering evidence." "That's actually to our advantage," Martinez countered. "We've been monitoring communications between the brothers. They believe you're hiding, gathering courage to accept their settlement offer. They don't know about our investigation." "So you want to use me as bait," Elena said bluntly. Nate, who had been listening silently, leaned forward. "What kind of protection would she have?" "And you are?" Martinez's tone sharpened. "Nathaniel Reed. Ms. Diaz is staying on my property." There was a brief pause before Martinez continued. "Mr. Reed, I understand your concern. Ms. Diaz would have plainclothes officers nearby at all times. Our goal would be for her to attend the exhibition opening, document the fraudulent artwork, and potentially engage Marcus in conversation while wearing a recording device." "Absolutely not," Nate said immediately. "You're asking her to walk into a lion's den with nothing but your word that you'll be there to help if things go wrong." "I'm afraid we have limited options," Martinez replied evenly. "Without direct evidence linking Marcus to the fraud, this case may never reach trial. Ms. Diaz will remain under suspicion, and Marcus will simply continue his operation with more caution." Silence fell over the cabin as the implications of Martinez's words sank in. Elena stared at her hands, still clasped tightly on the table. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance, to reclaim her name and stop Marcus from victimizing others. But the risk. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "Of course," Martinez agreed. "But I should mention that the exhibition opens Friday evening. If we're going to proceed, we'll need to begin preparations immediately." She provided a secure contact number. "Call me by tomorrow morning with your decision." After the call ended, Elena remained at the table, staring unseeing at the wall. Nate moved around the kitchen. Making coffee neither of them really wanted. The familiar domestic routine, a stark contrast to the dangerous proposition they'd just heard. "You're considering it," he said finally, setting a mug before her. It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. "Yes." "It's too dangerous," Nate stated flatly. "You'd be completely exposed." "If I don't do this," Elena countered, "Marcus wins. He keeps his reputation, his gallery, his freedom to exploit more children. And I stay in hiding for... how long? Forever?" Nate ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "There has to be another way." "You heard her. Without direct evidence. So we get the evidence another way." Nate interrupted. "Break into the gallery after hours. Find documentation at his home. Something, Anything that doesn't involve you walking straight into his territory. The intensity of his opposition surprised Elena. You're talking about committing crimes. And Martinez is talking about using you as a sacrificial lamb, he shot back. She doesn't care what happens to you, only about making her case. That's not fair, Elena protested, though part of her wondered if he might be right. She's trying to help. She's trying to win, Nate corrected grimly. Big difference. They fell into tense silence, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon, promising one of the sudden, violent storms common to the desert in spring. I need some air, Elena said finally, rising from the table. Nate made no move to stop her as she left the cabin, though she could feel his concerned gaze following her. Elena walked without destination, her mind churning with conflicting thoughts. The hidden valley of wildflowers Nate had shown her that morning seemed impossibly distant now. The sense of peace and possibility it had inspired overwhelmed by the stark reality of her situation. She found herself at the small ledge overlooking the canyon that had become her favorite thinking spot. The vastness of the landscape below usually helped put her problems in perspective, but today even the immensity of nature seemed inadequate compared to the decision before her. Return to Phoenix. Face Marcus directly. Risk everything on the promise that Martinez and her team would protect her. Or continue hiding, hoping that someday, somehow, justice would find another path. The sound of approaching footsteps alerted her to Nate's presence before he spoke. Storm's coming in, he said quietly. Should head back soon. Elena nodded but made no move to rise. After a moment, Nate settled beside her on the rocky outcrop, his shoulder just barely touching hers, offering support without demanding a response. I've been running for months, she said finally. Even before I physically left Phoenix, I was running, avoiding confrontation, hoping it would all somehow resolve itself. She turned to face him. I'm tired of running, Nate. His expression tightened, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. When I found your cabin, when you let me stay despite everything, it was the first time I'd stopped long enough to actually think about what comes next. Elena's voice strengthened with conviction. I can't hide in this canyon forever, as much as part of me might want to. You could, Nate said softly. You could build a different life here. Start over. The offer, implicit in his words, hung between them. A vision of what might be possible if she chose to stay. If she chose him, the temptation of it was almost overwhelming. With Marcus's accusations still hanging over me? Elena shook her head. I'd never truly be free. I'd always be looking over my shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up. She met his gaze directly. That's not really living, Nate. You taught me that. Thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing through the canyon. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the rocks around them. If you do this, Nate said slowly, I'm coming with you. Elena blinked in surprise. To Phoenix? Wherever you need to go. His voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. You distant. What are you thinking? She asked, settling in the chair opposite his. That, I understand why you need to do this, he said without looking up. Doesn't mean I have to like it. I haven't decided yet, Elena reminded him, though they both knew she had. Nate's smile held no humor. Yes, you have. I recognized that look on the ledge. Same one I saw in the mirror the day I decided to stop running from what happened overseas. Elena didn't deny it. If you came with me, she began hesitantly. When, he corrected. When you come with me, she amended. What about this place? Your home? Nate glanced around the cabin, his gaze lingering on the small details that made the space uniquely his. Carved figures on shelves, books well worn with reading, the handmade furniture he'd crafted himself. It'll be here when we get back, he said simply. The words, so casual yet laden with implication, hung between them. We, back. A future beyond the immediate crisis. a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. "I'll call Martinez in the morning," Elena decided. "Tell her I'll do it, but with conditions. You come as part of the team, and we do this our way, not just following their script." Nate nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "They'll push back." "Let them," Elena said with newfound resolve. "I'm done letting other people dictate the terms of my life." The transformation in her, from the desperate woman who had collapsed at his doorstep to this determined fighter, wasn't lost on either of them. The canyon had changed her, as it had changed Nate years before. Or perhaps it had simply revealed what was already there, beneath layers of fear and doubt. As the storm raged outside, they began planning in earnest, mapping out scenarios, identifying vulnerabilities, preparing for every contingency they could imagine. Nate's military experience proved invaluable as he thought through security measures and potential escape routes. "The gallery has 2 main exits," Elena explained, sketching a rough floor plan. "Front entrance on Jefferson Street, service entrance in the rear alley. During openings, they only monitor the front, with a guest list and security guard." Nate studied the drawing. Security cameras? Interior only, focused on the artwork. "Marcus was paranoid about theft," Elena said with ironic emphasis on the last word. "So we'll need to maintain cover inside, but the exits could provide quick escape if needed," Nate summarized, his tactical mind already processing possibilities. They worked late into the night, the storm gradually subsiding to a gentle rain that drummed steadily on the cabin roof. Eventually, exhaustion overtook strategy, and Elena found herself struggling to keep her eyes open. "You should rest," Nate said, noticing her fatigue. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to finalize details." Elena nodded, gathering her notes. At the door, she paused, turning back to face him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for understanding why I need to do this, for not trying to talk me out of it." "Wouldn't work anyway," Nate observed with a faint smile. "You're remarkably stubborn." "Says the man who lives alone in a canyon," Elena retorted, returning his smile. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, neither quite ready to break the connection. Finally, Nate spoke, his voice low and serious. "Whatever happens in Phoenix, Elena, remember what you found here." His gaze was steady, unflinching. "Not just safety or hiding, but yourself. That part doesn't change, no matter what comes next." The words followed Elena back to her cabin, where she lay awake despite her exhaustion, listening to the rain and thinking about choices, those made and those still to come. Tomorrow she would commit to a dangerous path, one that might lead to vindication or further disaster. But for the first time since fleeing Phoenix, she would be moving forward instead of running away. And this time, remarkably, she wouldn't be facing the journey alone. As sleep finally claimed her, Elena's last conscious thought was of Nate's unwavering certainty, not just in the justice of their cause, but in her. Somehow, in this remote canyon where she'd sought only temporary refuge, she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. Someone who saw her courage when she could only see her fear, who recognized her strength when she felt nothing but weakness. Someone who believed in what she could be, even when she had forgotten how to believe in herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.